Hey, and welcome to Fanya Mambo Africa, another episode again. And today I'm joined by two gentlemen. Normally we just have Fanya Mambo alone. Today we have some other guest who can introduce himself first.
Thank you, Sarah, for hosting me. I am Wangi Maina, the founding director of Kenyan Foreign Policy. Kenyan Foreign Policy is a premium news media outlet and a research think tank where we are able to analyze matters to do with foreign affairs and, of course, how the country is engaging with its foreign partners.
Interesting. Mr. Fanya Mambo, what has caught you across Africa in the last 1 week?
Thank you. I think the coming of Museveni
to Kenya,
and he comes with his own toilet, plus a few other interesting things that he said at the State House yesterday. I was elated to hear him say that what you people call history, he calls it current affairs because he was there. So I think that was an interesting moment for us as a country, just to see a man who's clung on to power for close to 40 years. And if he had more opportunities to cling on to power, he would cling on to power. And he's coming to a democracy where he's wondering, why did Uhuru hand over power? Why are the others handing over power? So I think it's interesting for Africa that we have some of those remnants who believe in being life presidents, and then we also have people who believe in progressive constitutions.
Interesting. That was, for me also, that was a very interesting moment at that point. So now we'll straight go into our conversation for the day, which is about AUC chairmanship. That's what brought Museveni among other presidents in Kenya yesterday. And my friend Mwangi was very excited because he's big on African issues and affairs. And I will start with this, and I'll start with you, Mwangi. The African lion that is rolling, or that wants to roll across Africa. And that's none other than Raila Odinga going for the top seat at AUC. What's your thoughts on that and the whole launch yesterday?
Well, Sarah, I mean, I hear people say Peleka Baba Addis Ababa.
Yes.
And it's not bad to have ambitions, because we all live because of ambitions. The candidature of Raila Odinga is one of the most powerful candidatures that we have ever seen since the existence of this country. Or rather, since when this capital city started endorsing its nationals to take over continental, regional, even global seats. Now, the interesting part about the candidature is that it comes from a very bitter political noise that has been able to create a political couple. I'm talking of Ruto and Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga has always been a rival, bitter rival to one William Ruto, who won the elections in September 2022. Now, the interesting part is that we have to always ask ourselves questions about national interests. What is the key national interest as to why William Ruto, who is the president of Kenya, is endorsing Raila Odinga? To me, I see it as a domestic affair. We are trying to solve domestic political scores when
with African
with the continental seat, because one, it's a very powerful candidature. This is a man who has been at the helm of opposition politics for more than 3 decades. You also need to remember that he's a former prime minister who has always, in one way or the other, found himself maneuvering to join the government in any way, not to become a minister, but to be a very influential figure. Now he's gonna move out from domestic politics and is now diving into the murky waters of continental affairs. It's not an easy task, the way people think, but it's a good candidature, a powerful one. Yesterday's launch at State House Nairobi was quite an interesting one in so many ways, because we did manage to rally only 3 of the regional leaders who sit at the East African community.
That's true. And East African community has 8 states. And before we go to all those details, let me hear Fanya Mambo. What do you think about Raila's candidature?
Thank you. I think from where I sit, we've just come from the Olympics. As long as someone is wearing a Kenyan jersey representing Kenya in a race against the world, we go behind that candidate. So from where we sit, if that jersey was on Kalonzo Musyoka, or it was on Uhuru, or it was on Raila, whoever it is that is wearing a Kenyan jersey and fighting against other people in Africa for a particular seat, we rally behind them. We don't even want to know the names of who he's competing with. All we want to do is to cheer him as the Kenyan son and as the only person who represents this country. We are looking at him, and this is one moment, and I love Olympics, where we forget where we are coming from. And we are just like cheering the person wearing the Kenyan jersey. And we cheer him to the end. And when he wins, we celebrate it as a Kenyan. In fact, we usually forget they're from what region, we forget from what political divide they come from. We just say that this is the person who is wearing the Kenyan jersey in a race against the whole world, in a race against the whole of Africa. And so from where we are saying that we stand behind Raila Odinga. He's the face of Kenya right now. And we don't care whether we have political divides or political disputes. From where we sit, he's the Kenyan candidate, and we shall rally behind him.
That's very interesting, and I love that because that's patriotism from all fronts. And Mwangi has raised a very important point that we were only able to bring here physically 3 presidents: the Ugandan president, the South Sudan president, and the rest were prime ministers and I think a few other forces here. Why is it that out of a regional bloc that hosts 8 countries or composes of 8 members, we were only able to bring 3?
One, I don't know who was making the invitations, but I can tell you Tanzania is an amphibian because they are not...
No, actually, yes, plus Tanzania. Tanzania was also there, yes.
Yes. But all I'm trying to say is that regardless of how many came here, even if we didn't get all the 8, I think the most important thing is to push our candidate to win. He raised an issue about trying to settle local political problems by having him out of the country. Initially, President William Ruto thought that by taking Raila out of this country, he sorted the opposition out and then he's going to govern this country the way he wants. Shock on him because it had never occurred to him that young people carrying smartphones and a flag and water would cause him such a huge headache. You know, he had thought that there would be the marauding gangs and so on and so forth. So he needs to know as the president that it is good to try and imagine that by removing Raila Odinga from the political scene that you've sorted your political problems. Let me tell you, this is a new country with a very progressive constitution and people will keep him on toes. He will be surprised. Imagine people will come. There will be a lot of people trying to... Nature doesn't allow a vacuum. It abhors vacuum. So there will be people trying to fit in Raila Odinga's shoes. So for those who were imagining that by taking Raila Odinga to the country, you've been able to contain anything, no. In fact, there will be younger people who are more vibrant and who give you a bigger headache than you thought you'd get from Raila Odinga.
Interesting perspective. Mwangi, you're very big on issues, African affairs, and we were able to bring 3 presidents here out of 8. Why is that, and what impact does that have on the position that our very own is going for?
Sarah, one thing you need to realize and to understand first is that the African Union Commission chairperson seat is not for the East African community, as to how it has been alluded before. It's a seat of Eastern African region at the African Union. At the African Union, the 55 member states are categorized under regions, and we have five regions. We have the Eastern region, where Kenya and other candidates, Djibouti, Mauritius, and Madagascar come from. Then we have the Northern region, we have the Central, we have the Western, and we have the Southern. Now, the East African community has 8 member states, and the Eastern African region has 14 member states. So we are talking of more than half of the capitals that entail the Eastern African region and the African Union. What does it mean diplomatically to be able to mobilize 3 leaders at the highest level? And when I talk of the highest level, it means politically that the topmost political seats have been represented in your country. We got South Sudan because by all essence, President Salva Kiir is the chairperson of the East African Community Heads of State Summit. Then we got Tanzania and Uganda. Rwanda sent a minister of regional cooperation. Burundi sent a prime minister. Somalia did not send anybody. The Democratic Republic of the Congo did not send anybody. The kind of notion or the kind of image Nairobi wants to portray to the whole continent and to the globe is that we have the backing of all the regional leaders, but we do not. We have to understand that we've had our own internal issues, and domestic policies will always shape the foreign policy that a country takes. We've had, since President Ruto came to power, we've had issues with our neighbors. We've had a whole commotion, including where a whole sovereign president is accusing our president, who sits with him at the same summit. So all of these wrangles simply means that our initiative or our effort to be able to front a candidate is not really well appreciated. And there are so many concerns, maybe unity concerns or so on and so on. But from where I sit, I think Nairobi inviting 8 member states was not a good image, because this is a seat of Eastern African region. If I was diplomatically advising whoever was inviting those heads of state, I would have told him, invite even Djibouti, invite even Madagascar, invite even Mauritius. You deal it with a bloc that you are competing with and sits at the African Union. We have 14 capitals that runs from Asmara to Sudan to Comoros and Madagascar and the others. You try to be all inclusive. Do not make it a block issue, because regional blocks do not vote.
Yeah.
It is member states that vote. And then we also have to be very keen and very apt in terms of institutional memory, which is very crucial and very important because of what happened to Kenya when we first fronted a candidate for the African Union Commission chairperson seat. The region that we have invited did not back us. In fact, a whole ambassador of a sovereign country from this region stood up and said, look, Kenya has a high appetite of wanting to take all of these seats, so we did not support them. Their neighbors, immediate neighbors, we are talking of Uganda, Tanzania, did not support us.
That's true.
So we have to remain woke. The issue is we have to remain woke. They have promised us a vote, but until that vote is placed in Addis Ababa next February, then you shouldn't celebrate anything, because this will be a very hotly contested race.
And that's true. And I would want to hear from Fanyamambo in particular. Why do you think countries like Congo, who have had issues with us at some point because of us sending our soldiers there to calm down, did not want to be physically present in Nairobi? And do you actually think they will support? Of course, they're not voting like direct, it's the bloc, but do you think they generally we have their support?
It's very hard to tell whether they support us or not. And I think the person who should be a lot more worried is Raila Odinga. The person I know of, William Samoei Ruto, is a very good politician. I've always told you. He may not be a good leader, but he's a good politician. And this might also, in one way, it is a good thing, looks like he's got the support of the state. But what will tell us whether he has the support of the state is the actions that will be taken between now and February. Because if the state does not do shuttle diplomacy to look for these votes within Africa, then what they are doing is setting up Raila Odinga for failure, so that they can come in February and smite him and spite him and tell him, look, you failed presidency 5 times. You can't even win the African Union. We've tried to support you, just to paint him as a person who cannot win any seat. So he needs to be cautious and to observe the next 5 months and to see, the next few months that are remaining between now and February, and to see whether it is worthwhile for him to be on the ballot at that point in time. Because if you do your maths and realize you're not going to make it, I would rather he withdraws other than goes and doesn't get it. And then now these other small boys will be released to go and spite him and say, look, we supported him with resources, we supported him as a country, and he did not win. And there's this thing of, the state is always launching things. So, I think yesterday they didn't come with ribbons. Tumetenga millionaire 2 millionaire ribbons and maybe 3 millionaire makasi. Just so we are happy that they were not doing that kind of launch where they have money for ribbons and money for scissors and so on. but he needs to be cautious.
And being cautious, I would want to understand from where you were speaking, being cautious, because in 2016, we really had a major campaign that was pushed from all angles, and that was the candidature of Amina Mohamed. What are the lessons?
I think she lost by a very small margin. It was very genuine.
But she lost, that's the point.
It was very genuine.
So my question is, it was genuine loss, yes. What are the lessons that we should pull from that small margin to ensure that our very own Raila Odinga gets to that?
I think there are no lessons to learn from such a failure. When you put in your best foot forward and someone else wins, I mean, what other lesson can you learn? It's just that the region...
How to mobilize?
It was not about how to mobilize. You know, some of these people, some of these countries, the way they do their things doesn't make sense at all. And I've always said there's always something about the voter. Most of the times we talk about the candidate. I mean, I have told you, there was a time when there was a guy called Jesus, and there was another one called Barabbas, and human beings chose Barabbas. It did not make Barabbas a better person. It just meant that we had people who voted for the wrong person. So sometimes as a candidate, you can do your best, and you can be the best there is on the ballot. But the mind of the voter is usually not a very good mind. And so sometimes if you lose, don't beat yourself so much, because the fact that, for example, Sonko got votes in Nairobi and Peter Kenneth did not get votes did not make Sonko a better person than Peter Kenneth as a leader. It just made Peter Kenneth a good person who was not voted for. So Raila Odinga should not kill himself if he doesn't win. I mean, sometimes the voter makes mistakes. In fact, most of the times, voters make mistakes. And the voters can be states, they can be regions, they can be blocks. Sometimes they make mistakes. So hit the campaign and start doing your maths and asking truly who is with us. Who is with us? By January, then you'll have known whether really this is something worth going for or not. And if they are not with you, don't hate yourself. You're not the problem. Sometimes the voter is the problem. They prefer Barabbas to Jesus.
Mwangi, Seychelles, Mauritius, and all these Djibouti competitors, what do you think about them and the way Baba or Raila Odinga has composed his committee for this whole campaign?
I think you have seen from what is coming from Djibouti and what is coming from Madagascar and what is coming from the candidature of Mauritius, you are really getting little or none information in terms of what those people are doing. And I want to contextualize it with the last presidential election. We see a candidate who has a lot of gusto, you know, running towards the string and wants to touch the string, and then by the time you are going closer to finish the race,
the red carpets
from the candidate himself and from the team that is pushing the candidate. So this is the same thing we need to be wary of in terms of continental diplomacy and politics. We are now not doing domestic politics, we are doing continental politics, which are really embroiled in terms of geopolitical dynamics, regional blocks, our diplomatic relations, our influence. So one of the key things we need to understand is that we shouldn't underestimate the other competitors we are having in the race. Because as I told you, this Continental Commission or the African Union is based according to regions, geographical regions. As from the Eastern, we are the only Anglophone competitors. The Djibouti candidate comes from a heavily Francophone and Arabic country, same as Madagascar and somehow Mauritius also speaks some French. So the kind of secretariat we have seen, and I've had my colleague talk about not learning anything from any failure. If you do not learn anything from any failure, then you're planning to fail. Because you have to sit down with a book and say, look, what went wrong? What happened? We had a president at that time who was very influential in terms of diplomacy, in terms of continental affairs, Uhuru Kenyatta, who did a lot of shuttle diplomacy, including the man who is today endorsing Raila Odinga. He made a lot of shuttle diplomacy going to some few Central and Western African countries. Now, you start from looking at the kind of secretariat that has been formed, who is involved, who is leading the secretariat. I mean, you want to take a continental seat and the person who is leading your secretariat is your brother-in-law.
But is he competent?
The issue of competence comes in. I don't question his competence, but also the kind of image you're giving out to the public and of course to the voters who are going to vote for you. Other thing is that we need to, for once, let us not have blind patriotism. Let us appreciate merit. And I have nothing against Ambassador Elkanah Odembo, who is the former Kenyan ambassador to Washington, D.C. But with all honesty, the United States of America, the kind of relationship we've had with them, despite them having influence in the continent, has been bilateral trade and largely bilateral agreements. It's not the African Union is a multilateral institution. A country that, I mean, an organization that involves 2 or more countries, just like the United Nations. Now, in my own understanding, I thought that Nairobi, with all the brains in the government, would have gone for a former ambassador or even the current ambassador who has served as the ambassador of Kenya to Ethiopia and the permanent representative to Addis Ababa, to the African Union. Why? Because they have deep insider knowledge. When you bring an ambassador, just an ambassador, he's competent, he's a diplomat, but it doesn't mean he's competent enough or has the skill enough to be able to understand the dynamics of an organization that sits, that has 2 or more people sitting together, lobbying and trying to push for decision making and policy making. This is the issue. We have to understand, we have to value merit, we have to bring, or we have to put forward team that is able to convince President Isaias Afwerki when he's sitting down in Asmara. He has always locked himself up in Asmara. He doesn't want to get out. That you can go to him and tell him, look, we are the best candidates for the continent. We want to deal with issues to do with peace and security. We want to push on issues to do with Agenda 2063. We want to silence the guns. But you do not form a committee of allies and cronies and family members to be able to push a whole continental affair. You will be disappointed early in the morning because the kind of elections we see locally is not the kind of election you're going to see at Addis Ababa because there's a lot of dynamics that are involved.
I hear where you're coming from. I would want to hear you from you, Fanyamambo. Do you think Kenya is influential enough in terms of the African politics generally, from where we sit?
I think one of the things that we haven't done right, and I think we are trying it now, is Kenya for a long time was known to have a very condescending attitude towards her neighbors. I mean, we were always trying to show Tanzania that they are nobodies. We're always trying to show Uganda that they are nobodies. And in the way we have treated our neighbors, they chose to vote with other people just to teach us a lesson. I think the first thing we need to do is to look at every country as an equal on the world map and to approach them with a lot of respect and to show them that we are not asking for this seat because we think we are seniors and we think we are good. We are asking for this seat as an opportunity we want to serve Africa. And we are telling them, bring your agenda on the table that you'd want to see implemented by the African Union, and we shall tell our chairman to push for you. So Tanzania, Uganda, and any other country around us, if Kenya ever spoke to you in a condescending tone or in a way that made you feel belittled, I think on behalf of the country, we are sorry. We want you to support us. We want you to journey with us. We want you to, because it's like this neighbor who says, hey, Mutoto ya fulani. Actually, if you vie in elective politics in this country, you'll be surprised. The village you come from, if, for example, you're going for MP, will not vote for you. Because there are people who are jealous. Hey, Mutoto ya fulani alisoma na wetu, and then they go and become an MP, and then our child, no, they won't vote for you. They are jealous. So we need to get beyond that and talk to them and see to it that they accept the candidature of Raila Odinga and actually also go ahead, because you don't get all the votes. Sometimes the people you speak to have an influence on regions. Like Tanzania, as I told you, is usually confused because they're also members of SADC. And Tanzania can help us win some SADC members from the lower side, Zambia, going down all the way to SA. So let us also look at people in terms of what they can bring to the table other than their own support. You speak to Tanzania, well, they open up SADC for you. and try to see how we can become beneficiaries of even other regions that were not Eastern Africa.
Okay. Mr. Mwangi, what are the dynamics we can use, as Fanyamambo is saying, we can use countries to influence ourselves on different aspects? And also, what is the main role of AUC generally for Africa?
Sarah, if you allow me, I would first want also to address the issue of influence. Nairobi has always been perceived as a very influential capital when it comes to regional politics and continental politics. If you look at the kind of biddings we have been doing for the past 3 or 4 years, we have lost major biddings. I'll start with Amina Mohamed in 2017 at the continental level. I'll take you to the former defense minister, who was also a foreign minister, Resho Omamo. She went for IFAO or something, International Food Organization, a UN agency. She lost to a Spain national. I'll take you to Ambassador Nancy Karigidu, who is the special envoy on issues to do with maritime affairs. She was going for the International Maritime Organization. SGC, she lost. We have just recently, we lost to Rwanda when we went for the bid to host the International Vaccine Institute.
And that was a painful loss.
It was a painful loss because the then health cabinet minister had proclaimed herself in a parliamentary sitting that, we have done the bidding and we have won. We are just waiting for the announcement. But then the kind of announcement that was made said, look, Kigali is better placed to host a regional office when it comes to International Vaccine Institute. And just recent, when the whole Gen Z clamor was up, in June, we lost a bid in Accra, Ghana, where Kenya was competing against Uganda and Equatorial Guinea to host what we call the African Union Humanitarian Agency. In fact, we came a distant number 3. What does that tell you? The country is no longer influential the way people think.
Why are we not influential?
Kenya is part of the Big 10 at the African Union. The Big 10 is like the Big 5 of the jungle. We are some of the big brothers, but we are no longer influential. Dr. Ouma Ogwell, who was the acting director general of Africa CDC, the first of its kind, an institution to do with continental health matters, did not win, and he lost against a Congolese candidate, Dr. Jean Kaseya. Why? Because the country is not crafting a good diplomatic strategy. He has talked about condescending attitude. And I hear people tell me, look, Mwangi, you Kenyans, you have what we call Kenyan exceptionalism. Kwetu tulikula chapati, kwao walikula githeri. We have to first acknowledge that, yes, Kenya is a regional big brother, powerhouse in terms of economy. But in terms of political and diplomatic influence, we have none, because if Uganda is winning against you, and not to say that they do not have a well-crafted diplomatic strategy, but now coming to the dynamics, we have to first acknowledge that we cannot take every seat.
That's true.
You do not bid for any and every seat. Whoever gave Nairobi the idea of going to bid for the African Union Humanitarian Agency should be fired, because Kenya hosts some of the African Union offices in Nairobi. Uganda has none. Why don't you, as a regional powerhouse, look and say, look, Uganda is Kenya's largest trading partner. We have the biggest refugee camp in the world in Dadaab, in Garissa County. Why don't we support our brothers to get an office, a continental office? Because we know what we should eye on the price. We clearly know that we are going for the African Union chairperson, a commission chairperson seat, and then we are still competing against our neighbors. They will look at you and say, look, we will wait for you for the payback time, and we are not going to vote for you. Secondly, Kenya was competing with Rwanda when it came to the International Vaccine Institute regional office. We should have seen and we should have known better that you do not, during Amina's time, they said Kenya has a high appetite. the former ambassador of South Sudan to Addis Ababa, and the former foreign minister, James P.T. Morgan, said Kenya has a high appetite when it comes to all these biddings. So we have to craft a very good strategy. We have to deal with our neighbors with mutual respect. We have to acknowledge that Nairobi, despite hosting so many international organizations over here, the influence is somehow kind of dwindling. Look at the kind of status we have at the foreign affairs. It's purely, for lack of a better word, it's purely shrinking. You cannot have a foreign minister who is doing domestic politics in Mululu and in Bomet. The work of the foreign affairs is to be able to push the interests of the country regionally, continentally, and globally. You have to move out to go and meet your colleagues. You have to speak to them. You have to tell them that Kenya is bringing forward this kind of agenda when it comes to peace and security, when it comes to food security, when it comes to local vaccine manufacturing, and so on and so on. Then the issue of institutional reforms at the African Union. President Ruto is the champion of institutional reforms, a seat that gives him an upper hand when it comes to Raila's candidature. But how has he been able to engage with the neighbors? How has he been able to engage with the region? He has been accused multiple times of being the prefect of the continent. Do the continent also wants to see a person who is more or less summoning them or speaking to them in a condescending manner? We tell those generals to stop that nonsense, to stop the war in Sudan. So we have to sit down. We have also to analyze the kind of diplomatic relations we have with the 55 member states. If you want to win an African Union Commission election, you have to have a footprint, a diplomatic footprint in every region. Kenya, as we speak, the most critical region at the African Union has always been the Western Bloc. And the Western Bloc has 2 Anglophone countries, but the rest are Francophone and Lusophone. So we only have an entrance to Francophone countries through Senegal, Dakar, because we maintain the sole embassy, but we recently opened an embassy in Ivory Coast, but we still haven't been able to make the inroads. So if we are unable to look at the kind of dynamics, the kind of alliances we are supposed to make, then the person you think is the weak person is going to do
wonders.
It's going to show you what Amina was shown. And to make it clear that this is a race that makes people cry, including whole heads of state at Addis Ababa, because you spent a fortune, money that probably would have been injected somewhere in terms of the well-being and the building of your country. So we have to get the strategy right. We have to stop the whole bean counting issue. Oh, we have 20 countries supporting us, or we only need 10 countries to support us. The rest we do not need. You need every and each vote to win that election.
And I agree with you on that. Where you're speaking on the dynamics, I want to hear this from Fanyamambo. Africa is a very young continent. The biggest population in Africa is actually the youth. But we are fronting, not that I'm against Raila's candidature, actually I'm supporting him. My worry is, why is it that as Africans, then we're so big on saying it's time for the youth. But then again, we're pushing someone who's sort of in their retirement age. What does that age factor do to this whole campaign for him?
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, we are looking for a candidate who is known. And it takes time to be known. I think one person who's gotten very well known in Africa is still at a young stage is Malema. Malema is one guy who is known from Egypt all the way to, across Africa. But rarely do we have young people who are known that far and wide. Raila Odinga, because of his stint in politics, now is known across Africa, and he's interacted with some of these people. But I think also there's one thing the president is supposed to get, and that can be a rude shock for him. Who are the ambassadors that you appoint?
Absolutely.
Because there's a time we were trying to get someone to go to the Congo, and you remember what he said during his interview. He's only run a petrol station and very many other funny things. And Congo is a very serious country, if you think about it. So he needs to ask himself, what caliber of ambassadors am I sending where? and what message are they giving and how are they giving it? Because this person represents your country. If he's a guy who comes and he's not able to express himself before a parliamentary committee, he was not even able to understand what is GDP. If, for example, some of our ambassadors, you've heard of one who's gone to a country very near us, whose education is even in doubt whether they got to high school. Now, if that is the ambassador you're sending, and they're supposed to discuss the African Union, and they're supposed to discuss the candidature of Raila Odinga, and they're supposed to be going to very serious diplomats and presidents to tell them why they want Raila Odinga to be, and they can't express themselves, they'll be like, if the ambassador does not understand GDP, and he's saying GDP is the population of a country, how will that ambassador then tell us geopolitics? How will they tell us regional politics? How will they understand interests and so on and so forth? So, Your Excellency, I think it's a good time when you start saying, wait a minute, there's friendship and there's government. And I'm not going to appoint friends, I'm going to appoint people of merit. And those are the people who should be leading this campaign. Otherwise, if you have a weak ambassador, then everything else will be weak.
And something else I would want you to touch on is on the issue of silencing guns in Africa. We've had war in Sudan, we've had war in Congo, and all these other issues that are going on. But then again, we have organizations such as AU that really have been quiet, or even if they spoke, their impact is not felt across these nations. Why do we still have people getting killed? Why do we still have those wars and we have AU? And what role should they be playing that they're not?
I work in mediation. I'll tell you, people don't wake up to fight. It's about interest. I have looked at some of the places where even Kenyans fight a lot, like Kapedo. And you realize it's a question of pasture and water. If these people are serious, come sink some boreholes on that side and some on this side. These people have no reason to fight. Now, the people who are fighting in Sudan are fighting for resources. And if you find a way to distribute those resources equally, they'll be. I mean, we've had the longest serving IDP camp in the country. And why? It's because there are people who don't want it to close down. They are running organizations that go to feed the refugees. Those refugee camps, though, they are the organizations today, if you said you want to bring to an end the issue of refugees, those organizations would kill you. They have food programs all over the place and they're always feeding the refugees, and they don't want the refugee camps to close. So even the war in Africa, it's about people selling guns. It's about people stealing from Africa. It's about so many things. So the African Union may not end that, but I think the presidents who are domiciled in those countries can do it. I mean, look at the places where there's biggest fighting in Sudan. There's something about resources. Why don't you come down and find a way to redistribute those resources without even addressing the war? The war will come to an end. Just come down and say, is it water? Yes, how do we make sure that everybody has water? Is it pasture? How do we start helping you to zero graze? Then you don't have to go all over the place with 300 cows. So once you address the issue of interest, once you address what makes people fight, naturally, if I know that I used to have 300 zebu cows, and I used to go all over the place and we used to fight and steal cows and steal pasture, and there's a government that has helped me have only 10 cows, but each is giving me 40 liters of milk. I have 400 liters of milk. And these cows are more beneficial than those ones. You will never hear a war in that region. So it's a question of redistributing resources. It's a question of getting people, when people are comfortable, they don't want to fight.
I just want to know, then why is AU silent? If the presidents of the said countries can't do something.
You see, African Union would speak so much. They would come up with so many resolutions and all. But I have told you, at the heart of those conflicts is a question of interest. First, interest in terms of those who are selling weapons and those who are benefiting from the war. And two, interest in terms of what the communities are fighting for. If you can sort what the communities are fighting for, even those people who are selling guns will not have a place to sell their guns. So it can be done.
It can be done. Something else, now back to the AUC chairperson role. Current chairman, Musa Faki, is from Chad. What is his influence in the upcoming election, if he has any?
He's an insider, number one. Yes. So he has deep knowledge about the commission, having served for now 8 years, going to 8 years that will end next year. So he has no major influence in terms of the vote, because a country and a single country will vote for you. But him having been him having served as the chairperson of the commission for 8 years, then tells you he still remains influential and he's outgoing. He can be able to influence. If he has a candidate of choice, they will be able to give hints and some few strategy on what to do. But what we need to focus on is the kind of agenda we want to bring to the continent. My colleague raises a very pertinent point, and especially when it comes to issues about silencing the guns. We've had a very bitter conflict in Sudan because of not even resources, because of power. Because two generals are fighting because they want, each and everyone wants to lead the country. We've had a bitter conflict, the long-serving conflict in Eastern Congo, because you cannot be able to bring leaders together and have a consensus and say, look, we have to really stop this kind of nonsense that we see in the continent. The question is, which country will do that? Half of the African Union budget comes from foreign donors, from the EU, from France, from the Americans, from other foreign influential countries. The countries, the 55 member states, have still been unable to mobilize and marshal resources in terms of running our own, in terms of financial self-sufficiency. We haven't yet achieved that. We haven't yet also achieved consensus. The African Union has always been a bitter place, because you want to buy a cow and I want to buy a goat, and Fanyamambo wants to get a sheep. So how are you going to get consensus? Who is going to stand down? All these issues and all these dynamics need an African Union Commission chairperson who has political acumen. Our candidate has good credentials in terms of political acumen, but then the age factor gets out a very hands-off Musa Faki, who has been on multiple occasions been accused of being hands-off. We now need a hands-on person who is able to deal with the financial mismanagement of the commission, who is able to speak out when there is crisis in Africa. The commission today has been accused of largely supporting the incumbent presidents. When there is an election and the election has been stolen, the African Union will issue a statement and lie on the side of the incumbent. We need an African Union Commission chairperson who will be able to bring us the face of Africa in terms of appointments.
Do you believe Raila Odinga is a person?
I would want to analyze it from a point of view that I have seen how he has been able to manage his presidential campaigns for the past decade, recently the 2022 presidential elections, and the kind of bravado we saw and the kind of seat sharing, slot sharing we saw. So, I mean, I do not want to discredit what he has done for the continent, but I believe one of the key issues that disadvantages him is the age factor. Age, I mean, as you said, Africa is a very young continent. You saw the kind of show we saw at the Nairobi State House yesterday. Baba from Nigeria, who is an African statesman, Olusegun Obasanjo, having been able to mediate the Ethiopia-Tigray conflict, we have to all salute him, together with the former Kenyan President, Uhuru Kenyatta, for being able to bring the parties together and say, look, we have to silence the guns. We cannot have children who are not going to school because you are fighting for power. We cannot have women being raped because you're fighting for power. But still at the same time, we need to show the continent that we believe in the power of young people. We believe in the power of moving this continent forward. Imagine an 80-year-old. Musa Faki is around 60-something, and he has been very hands-off.
So but imagine an 80-year-old.
I want you to paint a picture about an 80-year-old
versus a
African Union
60-year-old
Commission chairperson versus a 60 years old African Union Commission chairperson, and you're expected as a chief executive officer of the institution to, number one, you are the more or less like a principal secretary of the commission, because you are the financial handler.
Technically, you should be running around. That's what you mean.
You are running the daily affairs of the continent. You appoint people. You are the one who knows where the money is going to come from. You know how the money is being spent. You know how money is being distributed to other AU agencies. And at the same time, you're the one who is crisscrossing the continent to go and, you have a forum in Pretoria on this. You have a peace mediation in Sudan, Khartoum. You want to go to Eastern Congo for Luanda peace process. I mean, we need someone who not only have political acumen, has the energy in terms of the way they think and in terms of sort of physical energy.
So do you believe like what Babu is doing and is causing ripples or causing the old man discomfort in Uganda is what we should be promoting from what he's saying in terms of age?
Number one, Yoweri Museveni has a problem with anybody who associates with Bobi Wine. Even if you are found delivering water to Bobi Wine or carrying him in an Uber, he'll have a problem with you. So that is Yoweri Museveni. I think he just dreams of Bobi Wine. He has problems with Bobi Wine, and anybody who even comes close to Bobi Wine becomes an enemy of Museveni automatically. So that is not a problem. He let him call everybody an enemy. Anybody who associates with Bobi Wine is an enemy to Museveni. Even if it had been you, he would have made you famous. He would have mentioned your name and said, I've seen Sarah Mwangi with Bobi Wine, and he has a problem with that. Let's just ignore him. He's been in power for too long, and sometimes he forgets what's important.
That's why he said what you're calling history. He's been in power. It's his current affairs.
Just too long. And there's one thing he mentioned about the African Union getting the bulk of its budget from the European Union and the foreign
Americans and anyone else.
But one thing we forget is that you have one African president who is richer than all the presidents of Europe combined. In fact, most of the African presidents are richer than the presidents of Europe, America. And sometimes you look at an African president like one that Kenya has had in the past, I don't want to mention which one, who, if his wealth was put to task, I mean, he's richer than, I think, all the other presidents of the whole of Europe and America and then combined. I mean, there was a time Obama was having a meeting with African presidents, and he was the poorest man in the room, leading the most expensive, the biggest economy in the world, because they don't steal from the economists. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that even the bulk of the monies that these people give to us is the money that these old men have stashed in Swiss accounts and they don't use. I mean, someone has the equivalent of 3 trillion Kenya shillings in a Swiss account and another one. And all that money, what do those people do? They use it to build their roads, their hospitals, and then they come and give some of it to us in the African Union, because we know if somebody has put aside 1 trillion Kenya shillings, when will they use 1 trillion Kenya shillings? In a Swiss account, they are insane. I think African presidents need to be beaten up. You put them in a room and beat them up and tell them, wait a minute, do you know how much money it is that you're taking out of your countries to foreign countries? And do you know what that money could do for your people? So I think that's where we are. We are in a place where Africa also needs some sanity being pumped into people, and people being told, wait a minute, there is something called common sense. And that common sense dictates that you don't need 1 trillion shillings. You have 2, 3, 4. And now you have those who've just gotten power. They are trying to accumulate and compete with other people. Their dream is to become rich like so-and-so. I mean, it's nonsense. And then they die like Mobutu Sese Seko. You look at his palace. Who goes there? What is it for? It's even the birds don't want that palace.
Pure vanity.
So it's a lot of vanity. And I think one of the things that is messing up as a continent is that we have leaders whose primary focus is to steal from us.
Okay. And as we come to a conclusion, I want to hear your predictions on the AUC chairperson thing and your final message to, basically, because today we are discussing a very African topic, to both Kenyans and Africans in general. We can start with you.
Very easy. I think Kenya is in a good place. We stand a good chance. But that's not everything. We have to put up a very good campaign for us to win this seat. I wish Raila Odinga all the best. And for those who are thinking that by him going, there will be no opposition, I just wish to tell you that you'll be in for a rude shock. You'll be surprised. There will be a huge opposition to anything that you do wrong. I don't want to speak too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mwangi.
I think the whole issue I would want to raise is about meritocracy. Let us be a society that appreciates merit and appoints through merit. He has talked about the ambassadors who have been able to deploy abroad. I remember covering, in fact, I'm the one who shot that video of the Congolese, the consul general we were sending to Congo, saying that he had only a gas station experience and a Form 4 certificate. It's not bad to have a Form 4 certificate, but you need to think beyond the limits and you need to progress. At the same time, I think we need an African leadership that is capable of handling continental affairs. Key or top of the agenda should be silencing the guns. We cannot have a very young continent that is disenfranchised, that is fighting, that has chaos everywhere from the east to the north to the Sahel to the west, that you're having military coups because people are not contented. And I think may the leadership be able to make the rest of the lives of the Africans to be better, not in terms of empowering them economically, but giving them an environment that can be able to empower them economically. If Sudanese people are able to go back to the peaceful environment they've had for so long, then they can be able to work out their minds and their hands and bodies to be able to, to make a living out of that society. So yes, I wish Baba all the very best, but I need to emphasize on the issue of meritocracy. People who fail you and people who always run a bravado campaign will always at the end probably be disappointed because of so many failures that you have not been able to pick and to learn from them. Let us learn from the past lessons. Let us continue having institutional memory, and let us value meritocracy.
I love that, meritocracy. And personally, I also wish Raila Odinga all the best. As both said, let merit prevail even when you get to that post. Let merit prevail across. And to you who's been watching from across Africa, thank you so much for joining us on Alpha House. We wish you the very best, and we hope that for the African presidents and leaders, please do silence the guns. It's about time. Remember to subscribe, comment, like, and share our content across. We'll see you on the next episode.